All right, and the next session has started. I feel like we all have some training here now as well. So hopefully you could enjoy a quick 1 or 2 minute break and are up for our next fireside chat. You can see 3 people with me on stage. One of them you already know, and I will move myself to backstage here again. Just one housekeeping thing in the beginning. Feel more than welcome to use the chat and the Q&A section here too. Obviously, Nick will have some questions for Sean and Kevin today, but probably in the audience there might be some as well. So Nick is happy to take them in the end. Yeah, that's it from my side. I will move myself to backstage and then hand over to Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And we do have 2 very experienced leaders from the vegetation management world here today, so don't be afraid to ask questions in the Q&A bar there. So this particular panel session is inside the strategy managing a budget that ranges in the hundreds of millions of dollars for resilience, compliance, and cost control from a vegetation management perspective. And I'm joined today by Sean Standish, who's the former Director of Vegetation Management at First Energy, and now heads up Nexus Strategic Solutions Partners, which is a consulting firm that Sean founded in 2025. And also joined by Kevin Patton, who's the Director of Vegetation Management at American Electric Power. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Kevin on stage a few weeks ago at the Trees and Utilities Conference in Knoxville, Tennessee, where we talked about the AEP system being the largest transmission grid in the US and deploying stuff like remote sensing for a holistic risk assessment. So Kevin, it's a pleasure to see you again. So first question then, I'll direct this one to you first, Sean. So what are the biggest challenges you've seen in recent years and how are these connected with corporate goals?
Yeah, so one of the ones I would start with, and I think we always start with this one, but it's continues to be a challenge, and I think it's going to be a challenge for us in the future is workforce retention. How do we continually retain the critical people that we need to do this work? I think about it traditionally in terms of the technical folks, the operations folks out in the field where rubber hits the road, where we're trying to remove trees and do that work safely. But as I moved up in my roles at the utility, our internal employee development became a critical factor too, and developing future leaders in the program to help us mitigate some of these challenges that we have and plan for the future. Grid resiliency, a lot of discussion here this morning focused on fire specifically. I think it just in general, the scrutiny on the system and the reliability of the system and the demands that us humans are putting on it for our electricity and things are become even more critical. O&M pressures is always a challenge. There's always, I don't think that's a challenge it's ever going to go away. It's one it's there, and key as leaders is just continuing to look for ways to do the work in the most efficient ways to offset some of those costs. And then I think it's an opportunity, but I would also call it a challenge right now. Is the infusion of, we have a tremendous amount of new technology coming into the industry, and while that's a good thing, it is a challenge for operators to, what are we going to adopt it? When are we going to adopt? How are we leading our organizations through the change? So while it's exciting times, I think that is a challenge for leaders to work through.
Thanks, Sean. And Kevin?
So for me, I would be looking at, it all ties around the contractor. I mean, it's safety, contractor resources, and pricing. I mean, the ability to have that safe, ample workforce requires that we're paying wages that are a sustainable level. But you've got to balance that in a manner that you're ensuring that the costs are well controlled to reduce the rate fatigue for the customers. So without the wages at the sustainable level, we end up with high turnover rates, which causes a constant flux in safety, which immediately causes us issues in being able to staff to the level we need to provide the reliability. And without the reliability, the rate fatigue even gets harder with the customers. So it's trying to manage that overall resource for me.
Thank you, Kevin. So vegetation management is, it's typically the largest single line item in a utilities O&M budget. So when you look at, such vast amounts of budget, hundreds of millions of dollars per annum, what are the top 3 priorities that drive how you allocate resources? And Sean, if you want to take that first.
You might get me on a technicality here, Nick, but I'm not counting safety as a priority, but everything always starts with safety. Safety really needs to kind of be our way of life, but everything we do we've got to ensure the safety of our internal workforce, our contractor workforce, and be thinking about the public also. So everything starts with that. So now I'll start with my first one, which would be compliance. Compliance was always the next thing I thought about every day. Specifically starts with our NERC compliance, our federal compliance. Earlier it was FAC 003, our transmission standard was mentioned. There's simply no room for error with that. Can't take our eye off the ball with that as an industry or as a local utility. So, even amongst all the chaos and things that are flying every day, we've got to continue to deliver on that. But compliance, as we know, is also at the state level with our distribution systems and our reliability and what our customers are expecting there, our commissions are expecting there. I also think about environmental compliance. There's certainly requirements there around federal threatened and endangered species, but we looked at this as like it's our accountability to do the right things out there, and so we don't have bad impacts to the environment. We can really maximize the positive impacts we can have with the environment with the work we do. From there, I think about the next priority, performance excellence. Lump a bunch of things into this. It's identifying the most impactful work, identifying the best ways to do that work at the right time and the right resources to do that work. So, typically reliability or resilience and then controlling spend are 2 of the top things that float to the top of that list as we're identifying those things. But so those were some of the things that ended up being top priorities I thought about every day.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean and Kevin.
It's like we're almost reading off the same playbook there, Sean. Top of the line, it's that compliance component. We've got to ensure that we're protecting the EHV system across the whole grid, so we don't have another 2003 event, which is still hard to believe that's that far back in the past now. Reliability. Once you get it from there, you got to make sure you're getting the electricity over to the customers. And at the end of the day, it's that budget. That's that other compact. Even with a large budget, it always seems like you never have enough of the budget that you want. So give me a 9 digit, I want a 10 digit.
Remember, I think the last CNUC benchmarking report said something like 50-55% of vegetation managers felt that their budgets were underfunded, and I'm surprised that wasn't 100%. But interesting statistic nonetheless. So next question then, and for you to answer first, please, Sean. So resilience and compliance often compete with cost control. How do you balance those competing imperatives in practice?
I think one of the keys here is communication. If you're part of a large organization, you've got a lot of people around you, and you're responsible to put good people around you. So, it's simply just because if you're at the top of the organization, you need to use those people, collaborate, communicate. What are the top priorities? What are the things we need to make sure we're getting as much information as we can continually? And from there, it's identify strategic plans. I'd like to say make things small. Once you have identified that priority list, focus on one. What's the plan? What's the plan to execute? How much time do I got? What are some key milestones or benchmarks that I want to track along the way to see if we're making progress? and why you're putting those plans together, and you got that big list of priorities. It's look for commonalities. Is there things that is there solutions that I can implement that are going to help multiple things, and try to choose those as much as we can.
Thanks, Sean. And Kevin?
I mean, for me, as you're trying to balance those, compliance is the easiest component for me. And that's just because we're approaching 20 years of FACT 3-5 being in place, or FACT 3 being in place. So that's the known. You know exactly what you need to do. Those lines have been there for an extended period of time. There may be some slight changes, 100 kV to 200 kV. End of the day, that's a known and a given for the industry. The resilience piece is the part where you've really got to work on educating the leadership and educating your teams on that balance, to ensure that you're allocating the right resources, to get the best return on that reliability, with the funds that you've got available and the finite resources that you have available.
Thanks, Kevin. And I recall you mentioned to me that under FAC 0035, the reinterpretation of what is considered part of the bulk electric system added quite a substantial mileage to your.
Yeah, it was it added. We went from 8,000 miles to 12,000 miles. So I mean, it was a massive increase to our compliance component on our side with the near-term horizon lines.
Yeah, it's a huge increase. Okay, so contractor management is a huge factor in vegetation management spend. And what strategies have you found effective in ensuring safety, quality, and cost efficiency across such large vendor ecosystems?
Yeah, there's a lot of great stories here. A lot of fun stuff, and discussions and lessons learned and successes. But I think about this. I think about the keys is as a leader, or as we're implementing our programs, be deliberate, consistent, and fair. We want to communicate clear expectations, clear guide rails, just like we do with our staffs. Provide resources needed as much as we can to the vendors so that they can succeed. Be consistent, with our staffs. Acknowledge it takes training on from our to train staffs, and make sure we're being consistent. We have the same interpretations. I would say training with the contractors too, helping them understand what your vision is, what your goals are, and be fair. There's going to be wins and there's going to be losses on both sides, and if we both just have that attitude of we're working together here for that common goal, it'll work out in the end. But we consistent and fair there. And I think another key is, and again, it's exciting with the technologies that's at our fingertips now and starting to be deployed across the industry, is providing them with as much information, providing the vendors with as much information as we can. Help them help us, give them information that's going to eliminate unknowns for them, eliminate gray for them, help them price the work accordingly, help them plan and allocate for resources to do the work we need them to do.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And I recall one of Kelly's main points earlier was just to get the contractors in early, and to help a plan turn into a successful program. Kevin?
I mean, for the strategies, for me, it kind of breaks out into a contractor resource and a management strategy. From just a pure contracting strategy, I mean, you've got to bring the full spectrum to be able to help control costs and everything else. So you're going to need that mix of time and equipment, lump sum, competitive bid, reverse auction, unit price, all of those to be able to drive the cost to the most cost-effective product. And that can be a challenge when you're trying to deal with that over a large corporation on what that strategy may be, as you may not always have control over that strategy. But you can definitely want to influence that as much as possible. From a resource standpoint, for us, it always began with a solid vetting and onboarding process. I mean, as you're bringing on those contract resources, if you've got a chink in the armor for safety you're going to be chasing that the entire time. So you've got to make sure that you're bringing on the qualified vendors. Mall Paw and Three Fingers Chainsaw Company may not be the people you're wanting to be working for you. And then the final piece for the management strategy, you need the quality, the solid scorecards and KPIs to help drive that quality and cost efficiency. And that's a challenge because you've got to hold the contractor accountable. And when you hold people accountable, at times you have to have some hard discussions that does have impact on people's lives, but you've got to hold them to whatever the standards are that you've laid out in order to make that successful.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I agree. And I think having identified KPIs that are measurable and can be benchmarked against has been a consistent theme throughout the summit today, with numerous speakers raising that same point across all the different topic areas. So how have emerging tools like LiDAR, satellite, AI-driven risk models changed the way that you've prioritized and justified vegetation management spend? And again, to Sean first, please.
Sure. Again, it's exciting times with emerging technology here. It's, I think about that performance excellence comment that I made before. One of the key aspects is that is having effective planning. So how can we inform our programs with as much information as we can to understand system condition and then also quantify it? I think another trend that we're seeing in the industry, and it's something we've always done, but we've talked about risk. How are we quantifying risk? How are we measuring risk? How are we looking at the information we have on our system? There's some good dialogue earlier again on metrics and outage investigations, and how are we informing ourselves with information to make the best decisions possible? As you mentioned, Nick, I don't know that maybe there is some distribution programs out there that are fully funded to do all the basics of a utility VM program in the way that they would want. But I'd say that that with that O&M challenge, just understanding that plan and having these risk models enhanced to help us with that resource allocation is good. And then from there, I just touched on it, but it's optimizing the resources. A lot of discussion about dynamic cycling or cycle. I'd like to refer to it as cycle optimization. What's the work that we need to accomplish? What's the right time to accomplish it? What's the right volume of it to accomplish at one time? How do I get the most efficient tools in there to do it? And then I think it's also with these technologies, it's critical that we continue to not lose the lessons that we've learned from the past, as far as how they're being applied. So there's a lot of great opportunities out there to with this technology, and really I think we're at a point in time in the industry that if we're not doing pilots, or if we don't have that continuous improvement mindset in an area, there's really good things out there for people to try, and once you get your hands on it, learn how it can help you and help you more.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, and Kevin.
So managing 40,000 miles across 11 states here in the U.S., the situational awareness as a leader of the organization is a significant challenge. That local forester may be able to have the idea of what's going on for their 20 square feet of the area that they're covering, but being able to drive a top-down strategy, those emerging tools, the remote sensing, the AI, provides a situational awareness at the holistic view that's very important in defining where you're heading with your strategy, whether it's a strictly condition-based, the old just-in-time trimming, or like what we do here, which is a circuit-based with a condition-based prioritization. But that situational awareness is huge in trying to justify and prioritize that spend.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kevin. So both of you have worked under strict NERC compliance regimes. What lessons have you learned around aligning compliance programs with resilience goals? Do they reinforce each other? Do they conflict with each other? Yeah, anything that you would answer to that one, Sean?
Yeah, as Kevin mentioned, we're approaching 20 years with the standard in place, and that was my career. I've spent most of my career with the transmission vegetation management aspects of things, and I think one of the key things I learned early on is compliance with the NERC standard, also from an environmental standpoint. I think this is a key that I applied to both through my careers. We need to do the right things. If you know what the right thing to do is, you need to do it, or find a way to do it, or you're going to be told what to do. And inevitably, if you get regulated or told what to do, you'll be doing it in a way that's probably more inefficient and probably not exactly what you want it to do. So I think that's one of the key things I've taken from it. To tie that into some of the discussion today, around fire mitigation and things there. I think when I think of fire and how, our mitigation plans, I don't stray too far from our basic IVM fundamentals, integrated vegetation management. What's our goal? How do we do that work? And basic things like, prevent the trees that we think are going to fall into the conductors from falling in, maintain that clearance to the conductors, maintain the floor. And again, through our history and our research and our science, we know the ways to do that work and continue, and just making sure that we have that continuous improvement mindset and identifying, better ways to accomplish that work with, the resources we have. So, I think that compliance lesson of if you know what's right, what's the right thing to do, drive to complete it.
Thanks, Sean. Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the structure of just the compliance program for NERC compliance and what it's done since it's came into effect, I mean, you look at the overall number of outages, 200 kV and above, the reliability across the industry shows that if you're doing those things to ensure that you're keeping the trees out, it works. And so if you take that structure and begin applying it down to your resiliency plans and your resiliency goals, what you're able to begin to look at is how do we start building this program in a manner that it's defendable from birth to the grave, as far as from the construction, having it built to the proper specs, allowing yourselves to be able to set up in a manner to be compliant in the future, depending on what the status of that line becomes, and working your way through that, doing your maintenance, getting your maintenance adjusted in a manner in which you're able to get to that, so that at the end of the day, you will end up with that full blown style program. It takes time, it takes cost, it takes discipline, and there's some changes both in the industry and with the public that you've got to fight with as you go through that to get to that point. But that structure from being in that NERC compliance regime is tremendous on trying to apply that outward for the other areas.
Just a follow-up question on that. So, NERC FAC 003 all but eliminated outages on right-of-way. Most outages on bulk electrical system now occur from on and off right-of-way falling trees that are healthy and falling under storm conditions, which would fall into the resilience bucket. Do you think there's anything that more that can be done there? What do we think should happen? Do the regulators need to step in? Is this something that utilities can also take under their own wing and address?
You cut out a little bit. I think, I think there is the potential there. Maybe to the opening dialogue here at the beginning with the fire mitigation program for California. I don't know that we're going to keep up with. We don't do something drastic. I don't know if we're going to keep up with the needs. So from a regulatory standpoint, there may be something needed there from a, if we want to be able to identify mitigate hazards that are out there, there's going to be some resource challenges. So, the regulator may need to step in and help with that with recovery.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Sean. And Kevin, anything that you wanted to add to that?
I mean, the main challenge is, especially as you start getting to the falling, is the legal right to be able to do something outside the right of way. And then at what point are you exceeding the cost at such a level that you're no longer, you're not eliminating a risk, or you're bankrupting the people trying to pay the bills. So it's a real tight balance, but anything that we can do to try to strengthen some of those legal rights to be able to take a potential hazard would be greatly benefited.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And having a demarcate right to be able to do that, and having a means of cost recovery as well is obviously very important. So last question from me then, and I think there's a question from the audience here as well. If you had to summarize one hard-earned lesson about managing such a large VM budget, would it be, Sean?
Yeah, I think it's a phrase. The phrase is "wait to worry." When I think about this, sometimes we could get paralysis by analysis. We could try to solution out. Some of us, foresters. I always felt like foresters are somewhat like engineers. We're very different in other ways. But if we fall into that trap of trying to solution out everything that may go wrong, we won't get the value that we could have had if we just got started and we trusted our experience and our judgment and the lessons learned from the past. So, I think there's a lot to that. You got to get in there and make that commitment that we're going to make this work, and build that trust with your stakeholders that it's an education and through communication that it's not going to be perfect out the gate, but we're going to adjust and we're going to iterate and we're going to make it better. But so I think that would be the one thing I caution anybody on. It's just remember that phrase, wait to worry, and don't be paralyzed. Trust your judgment, your experience, and move forward.
Yeah, definitely. Analysis paralysis, or perfect is the enemy of done, as Navoy expressed before. Kevin?
Take a breath and look around. Regardless of the size of the budget, I mean, every single dollar counts. So that situational awareness is critical. You've got to know what's around you so you can just take a look at where to head to. Once you have that, you can begin acting. I will agree that we can analyze ourselves to death. And that's the one area we need to stay away from. But you need to have that overall situational awareness. Otherwise, you're just going to be reactionary, and you're going to grow more reactionary, and you're going to end up spending $1.50 for $1 worth of work, and you're just going to continue to go backwards. So take a deep breath, look around, and you'll get it. Nick, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So I think there's one question in the audience here. Maybe if we could have quite a quick answer, and maybe this is one that won't serve a quick answer. But we've heard here from James. I can't read his. Oh, James Ramiro, Chief Operating Officer. How is contracting taking a new approach for pricing strategies when soliciting for vegetation management RFPs? And I think, Kevin, you touched on this briefly earlier. You mentioned a range of different contractual mechanisms.
And for what you're looking at is end of the day, you have to have a base group there that can do T&E, because you have to have that base storm response, that base core work that you need. From there, you're going to be looking at what it takes to be able to get the best price. And that's where a lot of it is heading towards the more of a competitive bidding, to try to get control over that, so that the onus falls more towards the contractor than the utility to keep them productive and heading in that direction. So whether that's lump sum, unit price, reverse e-auction, or whatever strategy you want to look at from there, but it's some way to be able to know that for this mile, I'm getting what I believe is the industry best price for that work to be done.
Thanks,
Kevin. I think Kevin touched on a lot of good things there. The one thing I would add, what's new is just more information. I think through the remote sensing and things, we're able to provide more information. So that's probably, we've got some old tools in the toolbox that we've used forever, but I think this, with the new information, that's opening some things up for us. And then the only other thing I would mention is just look for the momentum. Who's performing the best, what's working, and what's working in specific areas, and just continue to grow from there.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, that completes the questions then. And Sean and Kevin, it's an absolute pleasure for you to have you on this summit today. Thanks for taking the time and participating. And hopefully we can put your names down for future summits in perhaps next year. But yeah, thanks
Appreciate
again.
the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. And as you can see me on stage, I will end this session now, basically, and start the last panel of the day. So stay tuned and see you in 1 or 2 minutes. And thanks from my side as well, Sean, Kevin, and Nick, of course, as well.
Thanks, Patrick.
See you.